All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Game Development Club meeting today. So, first things first, I have a couple announcements, as per usual. So we have a workshop next week. We are going to be doing pixel art. So I highly recommend downloading paint.net beforehand. If you don't already have it installed, it is free. It's like Microsoft Paint, but like way better. And then if you don't want to use that and you want to use a different pixel art software, that's okay. But the workshop we'll be doing will be in that, so you might get lost when it comes to like finding controls. Yeah, pay your dues if you want to and haven't already. You can come talk to Jimmy afterwards. He does have change today. Remember, it has to be in cash, or I think check also works if you even have a checkbook. And one more thing, Game Jam is on October 20th through 22nd from 7 p.m. to 7 p.m., 48 hours. Cool. So the reason why hopefully you are here today, how do we plan a game? Planning is really subjective, so everything Jimmy and I are going to talk about today are going to be mostly like things that I have done and that Jimmy has done. Honestly, for some games, you might not even need to plan that much, especially if you're making stuff on your own. However, if you're in a team or you're working on like a long-term project, I think planning is really important, and it'll help you actually end up finishing the game. It's really easy to get lost or to have scope creep get you, which I can talk about that later actually, if you don't plan ahead of time. But the first part of planning is brainstorming. You actually have to have an idea first. So how would you get inspiration? Hopefully, if you're already making a game, maybe you already have some ideas of the general idea of the game, right? But sometimes it's a little harder to think of those little smaller details that make everything up. Because you can think of a game and you can think, okay, my character is going to run, he's going to have a gun, and he's going to like shoot things. That's great, but like, how exactly is that going to work? You can look into other games of doing this. There's tons of games on the market, tons of games that have done well. I'm sure you have played many of them. Shovel Knight and Stardew Valley are on here, which are both great examples of games that have taken ideas from other games. That's like DuckTales, right? Yeah. So the Shovel Knight have where you can use the shovel to jump down and hit something like pogo stick jump off of like enemies and stuff, which is an idea that they took from the NES game DuckTales. And then I don't know specifically about Stardew Valley, but they took stuff from Harvest Moon, which in that case the developer basically took the game and they took everything they liked about it and nothing that they didn't like about it and made their own game. But yeah, some other things that you want to think about when you're brainstorming, just generally, are like your scope. So how big do you want the project to be? And this is why I said like that scope creep. So if you don't know, if you plan out something and you follow exactly what you planned, or at least pretty close to, that's pretty good. But if you don't make a plan, typically scope creep is like when you think of a new idea and you're like, this is so cool, I want to add it to my game. Well, then you add it, and then you think of another idea, and then you add it. And then by the time you add 12 ideas, like you still have to make the other chunk of the game. You haven't even gotten there yet. So it's good to try to plan things in advance. Yeah, there's so much cool stuff you want to do, but maybe you do that in the next game. Like if you want to actually finish a game, you got to stick to that plan. Target audience is also important. Who are you making it for? Kind of talked about that in level design. As well as your time frame. Are you giving yourself like the period of a game jam, 48 hours, or is this like several months or years? And then what is your end goal with the game? Is it to finish a game? Is it to show people? Is it to learn? You could just make a game just to learn. Another thing you want to consider is your experience level. If you are just starting, making Skyrim 2 is not really a good idea. You could do it. It would take you probably 7 years, if not longer. Probably longer, actually, because Skyrim is made by a team of developers. Yeah, that's something you want to think about, and something that you want to try to take things that you already know and try to expand upon them, improve them, make it better. All right, so after you have brainstormed and came up with kind of what you want to do, my next recommendation is to try to draw things out. This kind of helps you visualize things, what exactly you want to do, what you want things to kind of look like without actually doing any coding or modeling. Like before you start doing the actual assets of the game, maybe just draw things. But yeah, try to visualize what you want. Movies do this pretty often, and for good reason, because it's really easy. Instead of them, actually setting up a scene and spending all that time and money, they can just simply draw it out and kind of try to visualize what they're doing. Pen and paper is always really good. You could do digital, does not matter. However, whatever medium you use, but just try to express your ideas so you can kind of visualize or maybe even show other people what you're doing.
That's mine.
Yeah. So I'll have Jimmy talk about a game that he's done.
Yeah, so this was a game jam fall of 2022. I worked with one other person, but basically we just talked back and forth, and this was my sketchbook idea. It's supposed to usually be better than this. This is like really crappy in comparison, but we just jotted down game ideas. So the idea was jam, so we just said literally anything that we came up with in jam. And then when you see these names right here, these are just game names, and we were just like thinking about games that we like wanted to take inspiration from when we was that earlier. And so we were both like, I like Castlevania, so then we just made Castlevania. So then we made our hero character. This all just kind of came up just randomly. And we came up with enemy designs, and we came up with like the blender idea. Again, usually it's supposed to be a lot better than this, but it's very crude idea. And some ideas didn't get used. One thing to know that usually in game development, when you write things down, don't feel the need to like put everything on paper into the game, because there's going to be scrap ideas all the time. So we had a scrap idea where you put like the fruit in jars and then you throw it off a cliff or something, but that didn't end up happening.
Yeah.
And this is a really bad screenshot actually, but this is what the final product ended up being. So.
Yeah, it's also quite important if you're working on a team. If you draw things out, it might help explain what you're thinking of. Have that better mental image, combined mental image. If you can show them, as opposed to trying to explain it, they might think of something else in their head. This is another example from a game that I was working on, Alkaline. I was trying to come up with different like biome ideas, so I made a few different like sketches of different biomes. And kind of generally what I wanted them to look like. So like the mixed forest has like different types of trees with different colors, looks all like happy and stuff. And then the coniferous forest has like pine trees with like pine needles, and the dirt is different colors. And I was just trying to visualize kind of what the game should look like in my head without actually going so far to like code it. And this was also drawn digitally too. So, do you have any like questions so far? Yes.
What if you sketch something that is so complex, but you really want to put it in, but you just can't do visualizations? Should you just like drop it, or like should you maybe like see if you could fit that in and make it work?
If you're limited, like if you think of something that you really want to do but you're not sure how to implement it, I think the best idea is to try and give yourself like a time frame, like say a week or 2 weeks or something. And if you can't do it within then I would probably drop it, because it's like you're spending so much time on it.
That, or else find some way to like make the limitations work around your idea somewhat, like F-Zero. Have you guys ever heard of the original?
Yeah.
It appears to be something where the track is coming at you no matter what. The thing is, it's actually a side scroller. So they're actually bounded by that, and what they did was they had the map move at you. You don't move through the map. The map goes through you.
Cool. So yeah, after you have some sketches and stuff, next thing I recommend is a design document. So actually kind of formalizing stuff. And this gets more into the little nitty gritty, right? The sketches help you visualize things, but as far as like advancing from there, the design document kind of helps you plan out your ideas with more specific details, which that'll make sense now. So like art style is one of them. Once you have something sketched out, obviously, unless you want to go with like the pen and paper like art style, which you can, yeah, you kind of want to think about how you want to do your art style. Do you want it to be in 3D or 2D? Because that will have a massive influence on how you make the art, because you'll be doing a lot more modeling and making stuff that way. Whereas if it's 2D, you're going to draw them differently. The assets you make are going to be completely different. So it's something to think about as well. Next one. So in addition to art, you also want to think about music. Typically, you want the music to try to match the art style. So if you're making a 2D pixel art game, maybe you want to have more of an 8-bit style of music. Or maybe not even 8-bit. It doesn't have to be 8-bit. It could just be like chiptune, something along those lines. Or if you're making a game that's different from that, you could use orchestrating music. If you have resources to have somebody make that for you, that's amazing. But otherwise, you can find free music online. There's lots of different websites. Just be careful when you're doing that sort of thing, because sometimes they have royalty catches, so you got to make sure it's actually free to use and not just free, but they charge you 10% after you use their asset. But yeah. And other than that, you also want to think about mechanics. So this is a great time to kind of flesh out how exactly should the mechanics work, whether it's the character movement, how does the world interacted with, what does the world even look like, or sketching out how some of the mechanics work with that. Say you have a big open world, but then going into a room is a little different. You might want to flesh that out. Or how the inventory system works is always a big thing to think about and kind of plan out. Because then once you have this all mapped out, it's really easy to go into the game and be like, all right, I want to make an inventory system. Here's how it's going to work. Here's what this button is going to do. As opposed to if you just go start making an inventory system, you might start to make it and then realize, oh shoot, I wish I would have added this feature, and I got to redo a bunch of stuff. So sometimes it's easier to try to think of it all ahead of time and kind of get it all laid out. But yeah, for my game Alkaline, which I think I showed off at the showcase, but yeah, it's like a 2D Noida Terraria game. I have quite the extensive game design document. I'm not saying you have to do something this intense. I just did it because I was planning on working with another person, which kind of did. So I wanted them to know what I was doing and what I was planning on. This has a ton of stuff in it. But yeah, I planned out all the different types of elements and items, how they should function within the game. I just made a giant table of them. Planned out the character design, how the character should actually work. For this game, I was doing a custom system where you could draw your own articles of clothing. How would that actually update each animation frame so it's dynamic? I talked about how to design that, different items and stuff. So this is just kind of an example, I guess. There's all the different biomes, which I showed the different pictures from earlier, these two. But yeah, highly recommend Word if you have Word. It's awesome. I was not sponsored by Microsoft to say that, by the way. Google Docs is acceptable. Yeah, but yeah, something along those lines is usually pretty good. I actually don't care that much, but something that you can easily edit it, add pictures. If you want to use a notebook, you can, but then it's harder to move things around if you want to reorganize stuff. So, all right, next thing, time management. How do you manage your time? So this is also pretty important, especially even if this is a long-term project, it's still really important to try to plan out at least something so that you're not spending years and years, because I have spent years and years on a project where I did not plan out the time, and it's not really worth it. I never ended up finishing it either, so it's okay. But if I would have planned out my time a little better, maybe I would have finished it, at least some small form of it. But yeah. Try not to be too ambitious. Try to be realistic with yourself. We're all busy with classes. We're all busy with other things other than classes, like the game development club. So try to actually plan out your time. Yeah.
Okay. So usually I don't even bother with time. time. Usually it's just whenever I'm free and I feel like doing it, I just do it. But keep in mind that this is more so for when like you actually are trying to like get a job into something or like trying to make a deadline, then you have to like actually think about time management, I think.
Yeah. Something I do is I use my calendar quite frequently. I started doing that this year. And I put time aside for game development, at least like a few days a week. I'm not saying you have to do this, but it helps because then if I get busy, at least I have time set aside to work on a game. And if I have extra time, then I'll also work on it. But just so that if I do get busy, there's always time for it.
It's that sensitive part.
It's the blue.
And it's the red part.
The red is the classes.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, don't
You
show
got
up.
it censored. It's
I
not
did
like-
censor it. I don't want you showing up to my classes and harassing me.
Philosophy.
It's time for crimes.
Yeah.
Red.
By the way, we have
Thank you.
a Twitter and Instagram account and a few other ones. If you want to follow us, it's ISU_GDC. Post stuff from the meetings, from the workshops, also the announcements and stuff, I think. So, okay, continuing. What about budgeting? Most of you probably won't have money. Neither do I. That's okay. Typically, if you do have money, that's great. That elevates game development to a whole nother level, especially if you have other people working with you. Typically, in our positions, if you just make a hobby game and you sell it for like $5, all that money basically goes back to you, whether it pays for your time that you worked on it or you put it towards your next project. That's awesome. If you put it towards your next project, maybe you can actually do something with it where you pay for assets, which helps increase development time, or decrease it, I should say. Maybe you pay for like better tools, software, like you buy Photoshop or something, or maybe you use the money to help advertise your game, pay for an ad on Instagram or something, anything like that.
There's a lot of stuff you can do with no money.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do without money. Money is not required at all to make a game,
To an extent.
to an extent, right? So if you want to make a free game and publish it on itch.io, that's great. You can totally do that. It will cost you nothing as long as you use a free game engine. However, if you post it on Steam, Steam charges you $100 to even publish a game on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they say they'll give it back after you make like 10 grand or something. So it's like,
It's very big.
yeah, at that point it's like $100 is like nothing at that point. But like other game engines, they'll take a royalty or a percent, the big ones at least, unless you use a public domain one or make your own. But yeah, there's also ways to get sponsored. If you want to do a Kickstarter or a Patreon and you're serious about it, this is a great way to earn revenue from your peers. So for those of you that don't know, I'll start with Patreon first. Patreon is like a website where you can post an idea or something you want to create, or like if you have a YouTube channel or something. It's good for a lot of things. And you can say, if you pay me $5 a month, I will give you access to something. I'll give you like a prize or whatever. And then they'll support you $5 a month. You can use that towards your game, whatever you want to do. Or you can do different tiers, which is really nice for a stable source. Well, not stable, but like mostly stable source of income where you're earning money every month. And then Kickstarter is a little different, where you have like I'm sure you're probably familiar with this, but it's like you have a single thing, they pay you in full, and then you have to ration that money. So maybe it's a little harder to manage because you have to budget yourself a lot more. Say like you have a goal of 5,000, you get 5,000. Well, now you got to have that last, 3 months or however long you want to make this game over. So, and the nice thing about Patreon is a little flexible. Say that it takes an extra month for whatever reason. Well, then you can say, okay, just one more month. Whereas if Kickstarter, like once that money's gone, it's gone, unless you do another one. So. Yeah, another thing to think about with budgeting is your team size. Team size in general, just budgeting doesn't necessarily like go side by side, but if you are paying them, it kind of does. Generally speaking, when it comes to your team, you want to try to develop the game around your team. Maybe this is something you should think about earlier, but you can think about it now as well. does not matter as much. I don't know.
Communication, it's important. Please communicate with your teammates.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the whole point of planning too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because if you're making a game by yourself, planning isn't as important. However, if you're working with one or more people, it becomes vitally more important, just so you all are aware of everything.
If you want my 2 cents on it as well, the more people you have, that also means like the more like cooks in the kitchen, and you end up like butting heads a lot more. I don't think that it's like the bigger the group, the more arguments, but it's like you also have to kind of like spend more time explaining your thought process and stuff like that. So if you have more people, you kind of have to like make sure that you have it planned out of like, how do I explain my ideas efficiently and why they work to my teammates?
Yeah.
So,
Next part is what tools should you use. So now at this point, hopefully you have gotten a whole signed document put together. You have your team put together. You know what you want to make, but how or what are you going to make it with is the question. First thing that probably comes to mind is what game engine should I use? What coding language should I use? This is more technical stuff, right? And it really depends on a lot of features or on a lot of different decisions that you've already made. What art style to use, 2D versus 3D, the game engine can have a huge impact because you don't want to use like Game Maker to make a 3D game. I mean, you can, but it's probably not recommended because they don't really have much built-in support for it. Whereas the opposite scenario, you don't want to make a 2D game with Unreal. I mean, you can, but they don't really have as much support for it as they do 3D. So you're not really harnessing the strengths of that engine. You want to try to pick an engine that matches your needs and matches your experience as well. Like for example, if you already know like C# or like Python or something, you could probably pick up Godot or Unity pretty easy. Whereas if you use something else, it might be a little more challenging. Yeah, and also experience is also another thing to consider. If you already have experience with one game engine and it fits your needs, like if you already have experience with Game Maker and you're making a 2D game, that is perfect. Just use it because it's like you don't have to spend all that time relearning anything. You've already learned how to use the engine. You might as well just keep expanding on that as opposed to drowning in misery trying to learn things and figure out what's going on.
in terms of which one's the best, we're going to talk about that later.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But best game engine and best coding language is a heated topic that I would love to talk about. Maybe at the end of this meeting because we were flying through these slides. Okay. So after you've picked an engine, well, maybe you already have the art style, right? So you pick the engine, whatever. But you also want to think about what are you going to use to make the art if you're actually making it yourself. If you're using it online, that's okay, or finding it online, that's okay, or getting it from someone else. But if you're making it yourself, you want to think, what am I going to use? If you're doing pixel art, you're going to want probably a different application than doing something that's not pixel art, because the ways that they work, they're both geared towards a specific type of thing. Which another thing I didn't even think about to put on here is if you want to do vector art versus pixel art, or not pixel art, but like
Voxel art?
no, vector is like where the lines are smooth when you scale it, but like bitmap art, I don't know how to put it.
What's up?
Vectors, whenever you resize an image, it will resize that image based on a specific formula that you made when you first drew
With
that.
the lines, yeah.
It's just formula.
But what do you call the other format that's not vector? Just like
Just it,
Line art.
normal?
I would just say it's normal, but if you want to resize it,
Raster? Yeah, I don't know.
Drawing.
So,
Yeah. But yeah, if you don't know, so vector art or normal, like if you have a normal PNG on your computer and you make it a lot bigger, if you keep making it bigger and bigger, you'll eventually start seeing the pixels on it when you zoom into it, which is like maybe that's okay if that's something you want, but typically maybe not. Vector art, on the other hand, if you keep making it bigger and bigger, it will redraw it every time, and it will continue to look smooth even if you're zoomed in like a million times. So that's really nice. Probably vector art is probably best for like 2D games that aren't pixel art, because it'll look smooth and nice and pretty. But yeah, different choices. If you're doing pixel art, Sprite is what I use. It's like $20, but you get it forever. Paint.net is free, also a very good option. And there's a couple other ones there. If you're doing digital art, I have personally used Autodesk Sketchbook for some things. I don't really make digital art all too often anymore, but there's also a lot of other options. I know you can do it with Photoshop if you have money, but I don't. I think Procreate might also be like $8 or something, but yeah. And also, digital art is really nice with a stylus, if you have one. Pixel art, you don't necessarily need a stylus. That's more, you can do it with a mouse pretty easy, or a trackpad, whatever you want to use. But if you're doing like more digital art, sometimes it's a lot easier to do it with a stylus of some sort in a touch device. But that's not required either. So, lastly is your music choice. So what are you going to use to make music if you want to make your own music? Typically speaking, music is, if you know how to make music, that's awesome, but a lot of people don't. So sometimes it's either just a skip trying to make it entirely and just find it online. There's a lot of free assets for this as well. You can look up public domain music anywhere, and just, I mean, it might take you a while to search and find something, but you can. Otherwise, there are a lot of options for making music. LMMS is the first thing on there because it's free. It is a complete DOS or whatever it's called, the music development software. You can do a lot of things in there. It's used for a lot of like chiptune stuff as well, and they have lots of examples and tutorials. Other than that, if you want to spend some money, I think FL Studio, I think there might be a free version. A lot of these have free versions. Yeah, a lot of these have free versions of free trials, but you can't actually publish the music that you work on unless you pay for it. So they'll let you make a song, but then once you want to export it.
May also be limited in the amount of tracks you can make per song.
Yeah, they'll limit you, tracks per song. They'll limit you some way so that you can get started with it and experiment with it. And then once you like it, then they'll be like, haha, you have to pay now. So
Actually, LMMS, it's a free trial that goes into a paid version, but it's kind of like WinRAR, where it's like it tells you that you need to pay, but it's like you don't have to.
yeah.
You know,
I mean, it's the same with any software.
we're
I didn't say
all
that.
college kids, they understand.
But yeah, if you have like an Apple device, GarageBand is a great choice. I think. I've only used it on my iPad, so you tell me. But for general audio editing, Audacity is a great choice. I use it for sound effects all the time. For example, if you download a free sound effect, odds are it's not going to be clipped, right? Like they're going to have a bunch of silence at the end of the clip or something for some reason. So Audacity is a great tool to be able to import it, and you can trim it down, you can make it louder, you can distort the sound or something. It allows you to have a bunch of sound effects. I love that tool, it's really awesome. I'm not too familiar with the other ones, but I would recommend doing some research as well on all of these, including the game engines and the art choices. So, yeah, I've heard of Logic Pro as well. I think that one's pretty popular. Yeah. GIMP? Oh, I thought I wrote that down. I guess not.
You got rid of it 'cause you're like, who uses GIMP?
No, you got rid of it. I wrote it down.
I thought it
Yeah, GIMP is awesome. GIMP is free, and you can do both of these in it pretty easily. Yes.
So you said earlier if you wanted to, if you use like free licensed music for certain stuff in like your game.
Yeah.
What happened if you like to use freelance music for the entire thing? That probably just suck, wouldn't it?
That should be fine as long as it's free and they don't like
No,
charge
I mean
you.
like for the user. Like if it's just all freelance music and no original tracks.
As long as it's uncommon, right?
As long as they don't find it.
Well, it depends, right?
Because I'm
Like
thinking Kevin McLeod sees all that.
Oh, Kevin McLeod.
Oh, Kevin.
Is that
Yeah.
how it works?
Kevin
Mc-
McLeod.
McLeod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
McLeod.
This is a dumb analogy. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, right? Because Kevin has a huge backlog of songs.
Yeah.
So if you pick one from a niche album, they probably won't recognize it. Now, if you pick like Fluffing a Duck, that one is super popular, and they would probably recognize it right away and be like, that's cringe.
Yeah, if you
That's
playing
crazy.
less, it only hears.
Yeah, the Spinning Monkeys song that people used on TikTok for a while. Yeah. But yeah, you can use public domain, just best judgment, right? Like if you hear a song and you're like, okay, that's too familiar, then
Try to use experiment, basically.
yeah. But like a game I used to play on mobile back in the day was called the Blockheads, and like that game was chock full of just free public domain music, including some of his songs. But it's like it fit the game well too. So okay. So now that you have designed everything, or at least like mostly, right? What are my first steps? What are your first steps? Start with, well, this is like the only slide, but you wanted to create a minimum viable product, basically a prototype of some sort. Maybe start experimenting with that game engine that you have picked, and try to create something bare bones that is considered a game, but not like fleshed out either. So, like it says, the simplest version of the game that you can make. So for example, if you're making like a first-person shooter, maybe it's as simple as like you have a flat ground, there's some walls, the enemies are literal cubes. Might sound familiar to a Unity workshop, but like minus the textures. And you want to make sure that it's still kind of fun, even though it doesn't look visually appealing or sound good at all. Like it is the game, right? And it's you can prove that it works, which is what the minimum viable product is. It's like the bare minimum you can do and still call it a product.
An example I'm thinking of is that if you're making a 3D platformer, what people usually do is they make the main character first, as in like all of the animations and like the entire move set, the entire programming first, and then what they do is they like make this like simple like insane asylum room with like a couple jungle gym platforms, like slopes and stuff like that, just to see how the character would interact with it first before making the whole setting around it.
Yeah, the character is also really important to get out of the way first because, like we talked about in the level design meeting, that can influence how the level is designed as well. So maybe you plan something out and you make the character and you're like, okay, I wanted to double jump, but I don't really like it that much. Well, then you can remove it. And it's still in that early phase where you can still modify things pretty easy. Whereas if you make it later, then it's like, oh, I got to go back and actually edit all the level files. Yeah, I think there's another game. I think Cuphead also did something similar when they were developing.
Yeah, I think they were like, so it took them like 7 years to make, from what I remember. So like essentially, what they did was they took like, so they originally had a basis of like 10 boss fights. They would have like, little standards. It was very simplistic. And then they just kept adding to that over time. So like they start with like 10 fights and one small overworld, then they, kind of added to more. They kind of like, added basically added more content to the game.
Yeah, that base like 10 though was the minimum viable product. Like right, like if they would have fleshed that out, they could have considered that an entire game.
Yeah.
However, once they got it to work and they they could have people play it and say, do you like this? Is it fun? What do you not like about it? Then you can move on and keep building and keep adding stuff, stuff that you know is already working. So, yeah. Okay. So, that is all for this meeting. If you have any questions or want to talk about anything afterwards, I guess we'll have some extra time here, but some recap announcements. Next Tuesday will be pixel art again. Download paint.net beforehand if you can. Like I said, it's free. Should be. I think you just Google it and probably find their website. And if you want to pay dues, Jimmy is right here. Come talk to him.
Give me money.
Make fun of him, whatever you want. Yes. Yes, so we have a game jam that we host once a semester. Excuse me. And I forgot to put it on the slides, but that will be October 20th through October 22nd. It'll be from 7 p.m. on that Friday to 7 p.m. on that Sunday, 48 hours. We'll announce the theme at the beginning. We will have more details on that. We have a location picked out. It's in Bessie Hall, but I don't remember the room number off the top of my head. October 20th
If you're in the Discord,
through the
we're all
22nd.
gonna be like
Yeah, if you're in the Discord, we will send out plenty of announcements about it
and emails.
and emails. We'll probably add that to the next announcement email combo.
We should make a MySpace.
A MySpace, that's great. I don't even think that website's up.
They're not.
No. But yeah, without further ado, go forth, make games, and be awesome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You have 5 hours.